One time I was showing a Patterns of Evidence film down in Branson, Missouri at a theater, and this man at the very end of it came out of the theater. He was probably 6'7" or 6'8". He seemed really, really big. He was really wide too, and he was quite upset with me at the end of the film because he says, I don't need any evidence for my faith, you know? And I said, well, I understand. I was just afraid he was going to do something to me at that time. But anyway, some people get upset if you try to say we have evidence for the Bible. They say, hey, I just believe I have enough faith, I don't need evidence. But how does that work?
Well, I think it's great that there are people who don't need any kind of evidence to buttress their faith. I find there are a whole lot more people who are affected by the culture, which is very critical of our kind of thinking. And can our thinking possibly be true? And they have some concerns or doubts about that. And so when they raise those, they seem quite reassured when you can give credible answers to the kinds of things that would support what the Bible says. They find it very reassuring. Oh, that may not make sense to me from my world, but in that world, that's how things worked, or that's the way that people thought. And so that does fit. Oh, maybe I can relax and be more confident about what I believe.
There's an anxiety for a lot of people that don't know what truth is. And this is where we go back to, we have a historical faith. That's why we call it the historical faith society. This is there's a beginning of time, and then God has acted through time. And the thing I love about what you guys are doing is that you're going back and you're looking at events that were recorded. And I think the word testament means testimony, right? It's a testimony of God acting throughout history. That's why I think it's so important that we support the work of the archaeology that you're doing. I think there's been kind of this criticism that says, oh, you're just trying to prove the Bible. Aren't you really basically trying to verify? You're going to see what we can find. But there's another agenda, which is not to find anything. Which is not to see any connection. I've had some scholars say to me, oh, we see evidence for the Bible all the time, but we know we can't talk about it.
Well, as Scott said earlier, this evidence that comes from the ground is not self-interpreting. You have to have a context for it. If the Bible is dismissed as an historical context, then you have nothing except the limited context of your archaeological site or comparison with other sites, and that's too limited to make an accurate decision about what you have. Look, everything we do in our life is based on evidence. People require that in order to make decisions about any discipline they have. I teach in a university, as does Boyd and others. We constantly are teaching our students the foundation and the substance for why they should believe these things. They come in as freshmen, basically untaught in many of these areas, and we build a groundwork so that they can know the things are sure that we are teaching them. And then they can go and teach that reliably to others. I think the Bible is communicated that way. It was meant to be a truth that was received and then passed on to others, accepted it as truth, and people built their lives on that. They don't build their lives on simply religious faith. They build it on a foundation of facts that is the foundation of faith.
Tim, I was invited a few years ago to lecture at Hebrew University, and it was 30 to 40 master's level and PhD students. So these are future leaders in archaeology in Israel. And I talked to them like I would talk to any other group. I'm talking about archaeological data, and I'm using the biblical text to show the relationship and to build synchronisms. When I finished, I think every single student stood in line to shake my hand and to talk. They were fascinated by it. And one after another, they told me essentially the same thing. You're the first one all year to use the Bible in our classroom. This was fascinating to them. They weren't against it. They hadn't even been exposed to it. And so the problem is even worse than we have supposed. So what I want us to do, and guys like Randall and Boyd are already doing, is to engage in the arena of ideas. And I think if we do that, we're going to make good ground in this cultural war.
Right. And we know that there are people out there that are not archaeologists, that are maybe from a Christian background, that are claiming that certain things this is archaeology, or this is evidence for something in the Bible. and they have no training. All they're doing is making a proclamation of something. That's on archaeology. But it gets a lot of people excited because they go, oh, there's some evidence here, and then you guys have to deal with the fact that, wait a minute, this is giving, what we're doing, which is scientific archaeology, a bad name, as it were.
It's a problem because I've seen even real credible scholars, particularly in apologetic areas, that know their material, but they don't know archaeology. And they listen to some of the sensationalists who come up with supposed finds which have no verification, no one else supports it, and they have latched onto them and let's shall we say supported and perpetuated that idea. And because of their credibility, people believe it. And we have no end of that today. It's all over the internet. There's books being written. Most people who are credible archaeologists can't spend their time refuting all of this popular literature that's out there. But that's what's reaching so many people. And we need a platform for people who are professional archaeologists, but yet committed to the biblical text to be able to get that message out. Because you can't constantly take in the negative and expect people to listen to you. You're constantly refuting rather than affirming.
Yeah, and that pseudo-archaeology makes it harder for guys like us who are doing real scientific archaeology, who happen to also be believers. It makes it harder for us to raise money when they're dealing with that nonsense all the time.
Yeah. So let's just talk about what is the for those people who don't know, what's the approach that you are using in archaeology when you go to a site? Because I know both of you are at active dig sites. What's it like in the day of life of an archaeologist? There's a style of archaeology that you are using. Is that correct?
Well, we all basically follow an adapted version of what we call the Kenyon Wheeler methodology. Mortimer Wheeler kind of perfected this down in Africa, and Kenyon improved upon it. And what we do is we're trying to open up a broad area and then to understand the stratigraphy as we go down vertically. At Shiloh, we're not only dry sifting, but we then wet sift or wash all the material. We track everything. We use luminescence testing in the field. We have an infrared ultraviolet lighting system. And part of that is just out of a desire for excellence, which is part of our culture, but also because we're dealing with the most important thing that we could ever deal with, history itself. And so we want to do it right. We want to have a credible record that we leave behind. So we bring to bear the hard sciences, but archaeology itself is a soft science. So the short answer to your question is we follow an adapted version of the Kenyon Wheeler method of vertical stratigraphic excavation, but with all the modern technologies being brought to bear.
Archaeology done well is a tremendous amount of effort that takes thousands upon thousands of man hours, person hours to do it well, and you are capturing as much data as you can as you go down through the earth, and you are recording what you find, and you have a 3D location for everything that you find so you can locate it, and to get that data, to record it, to keep track of it, keep track of the materials that you find is kind of unbelievable how much work that it is. But when you're all done, then you or anybody else can go back and look at that material so that you can analyze it and so that you can synthesize, okay, what all did we find and what all does that mean? And Scott and I finished up with another excavation. We're doing finishing up the final reports on that. And I was just amazed at how much data over 20, 25 years that it was gathered that is still good and clean, and we can go back and look at it. It's a lot of hard, tedious work that you are doing, but you are recording data that then you put into the academic record for you and everybody else in the years to come can go back and look at it and make use of it.
The Wheeler-Kenyon method allows you to document very carefully measurable areas, but the problem is you're limited. Every season you dig, you may come up with a surprise, something that changes what you were thinking from the previous season. And the problem with these methods is they're limited. The older method was to just get as much territory as possible and then see the bigger picture. Ideally, and what Kermit O'Mccotter and others have done, of having the years and the funding to do it, has been able to do both. Put the big picture together with the small documentation. And the reason today we don't have that is because digs are expensive. People have to pick a strategic area where they think they'll get the most information, target that, then hope they can do a next season. And they're limited. So the ideal would be to spend decades at an area to where you could get the entire study of it through all the stratigraphy, but also through the wider context. And then you can make proper decisions.
If we think about it too, when you dig into a site, it's the only time it'll ever happen, because you're identifying all the artifacts and you're taking pictures and your drawings and everything as you go down layer by layer. And then you have to report on it. You have to write up and publish what you found for other people to look at. And so that's why I think the Historical Faith Society is getting behind the work that you guys are doing. We're asking people to get behind it and to help, because there's a very narrow window. We don't know what the future is going to hold in some of these places. Great work has been done, so we've got to find a way to get behind and support the work that you gentlemen are doing, and others will be doing as well. And I know that, Scott, at your site, people this year, you're in need of volunteers, right? You've got a great need, because it's going to be fun. It's going to be amazing to come to a site and actually help dig. So we're going to let people know about that. But just tell us a little bit about that.
Volunteers are critical, Tim. On a daily basis, I get cancellations of people who can't come because of COVID. And so this coming season in particular, we need all the warm bodies and willing people that we can get to enable us to have a successful season at Shiloh. Money and volunteers are what make a dig go.
Well, what does it take to be a volunteer then?
Great attitude and willingness to work hard and do what you're asked, and you'll have a great experience.
Mm-hmm. And how long can you go for there?
Well, I mean, think about the old days. Take Kathleen Kenyon in Jerusalem in the 60s. A 10-week season for 10 years with 500 men. Wow. 500 men, 10 weeks, 10 years. You know, those days are gone. And really, we can't process. Imagine eating all the food for 2021 that I'm going to consume. I eat it all in a day. I mean, I could never process all of that. But yeah, we're in the field for 5 weeks, and money is part of that, and then just the logistics of life. But it then takes us the rest of the year to digest and publish and study all the things that we have excavated. Boyd mentioned our previous excavation at Khirbet el-Maqater. Before we went into final publication, he and I took a team back to Israel, and we spent 3 weeks getting everything out of storage, double checking everything one more time. And of course, we discovered errors that were made in the initial recording. So it's a very meticulous process, but it's also very, very rewarding.
Both of the sites are in need of funding. Where you are at, Randall, is more steep and more difficult and more dangerous in a sense for volunteers.
In one sense, we all work in the territories, the disputed territories, and we're under a agency which is not necessarily the major agency like the Israel Antiquities Authorities. It's the civil administration for Judea and Samaria. They're subject to some military issues. They're subject to a lot of frankly, the foreign policy of other countries like our own. If our foreign policy changes and certain restrictions are put upon them, those are going to be put upon us. So again, it's very critical that we are able to do what we do while we can do it.
What have you found that so far in doing this work that has really touched people with their faith?
Well, one thing is just being able to touch history. Well, at Shiloh, we start by digging up remains from the time of the New Testament, then you go to the time of Eli and Samuel and the tabernacle, then you go down to the time of Abraham. And I tell people, when you come, you are going to find things from each of those time periods. You will touch elements from biblical history, and it might be something mundane, or it might be something exciting and perhaps even historical. You will touch history, and for us believers in the Bible, to touch biblical history is fascinating.
I tell people, you're not just learning about history, you're actually making it. Because the only new information coming to us about the Bible comes from archaeology. It can help clarify the text. It can confirm things in the text. Sometimes it can even help us correct the wording of the text. It just depends. And that's why Dead Sea Scrolls and things can be very important for understanding the whole background of both Old and New Testament.
Well, Tim, that's a difficult question for me to respond to because there's so many things. But the most common thing we excavate is pottery, and that's about 2,000 pieces a day on a good day. And I think about what Paul told the Corinthian church, that they had the treasure of the gospel in jars of clay. And so when we're excavating these ancient jars, some from the period that Paul would have said that, there's something about that where we're understanding ourselves and who we are and how we fit into God's plan when we're dealing with this material culture from the past, really attempting kind of more on an anthropological level to ask and answer those basic questions of like, who am I? What is my purpose? Why am I here? Where am I going?
You felt a very specific calling to the location that you were at, up to Shiloh. Was that the phrase?
Well, I'll give you the very short version of a long story. Before we closed out our previous dig, how do you know when a dig's over? So we're trying to make sure we were making good decisions. So we went into a time of prayer and fasting as we were considering all this. And the verse that came to me in that time, I did not know what the verse said, but just Jeremiah 7:12. And when I turned there, I read the words, "Go now to Shiloh, see what I did, and make it known." And I felt like I had a clear direction of where we were supposed to go, and then everything fell into place for us.
Well, one of the favorite verses that I have is the Ephesians 2:10, where it talks about, for we are Christ's workmanship, and that he's prepared good works for us to do before the beginning of time. And I think that I want people to know is that there are good works for us to do, and sometimes that means coming along other good works. What more important event could we get behind other than to help to testify to the truth of God's Word? And obviously I'm looking for patterns, but what we're seeing is these patterns are matching and supporting the historical credibility of the Bible. So with that, I want to thank you all. We're going to be hearing more from you. In fact, I think in July, we're going to be God willing, hearing from you live at Shiloh. And we're going to be, we've got stuff that we've done in the past where I've been there myself and we filmed. So that's going to be our big event in July. But as we're really excited about the hidden caves of the Dead Sea Scrolls with Randall Price. And we're going to be getting deeper and deeper into that now as we look at what's there and why is this so important. But thank you everyone for watching this little panel discussion that we had here. And if you've got, if you want to participate and help, we're going to give you information where you can get involved with all this. So thank you again, gentlemen, for helping us.
Thank you.
Thank you.